All right, hello everybody. My name is Billy Johnson. A little bit of background: we just moved states last week, so I've got boxes everywhere, and I've got a 2-year-old, so I'm hiding in a room that is kind of put together, but here we are. So um, for this assignment, the different topics that I selected. So out of Module 5, I selected the 360-degree feedback when we're talking about employee development and evaluation. The reason why I chose that topic is because actually I had a very, very bad experience with this 360 feedback model at one of my jobs. And so I thought, I want to look at some of the research and see what did they say about it and how could that have been done differently and better in my situation, but also for future employees and employers that I work with as a consultant. For Module 6, I chose looking at a multicultural context, but specifically how the importance of building trust and the process of building trust and relationship in as a consultant working with companies and between companies that might be employer to employee, vice versa, or even like in some of the research that we'll discuss in between. So building alliances between two different, but just the importance of multicultural competence, but building trust in that relationship. For Module 7, I actually selected appreciative inquiry in the process of consulting. And I chose this topic because I teach a class on group dynamics and team interventions for a college that I work at, and I love appreciative inquiry. And I think it is so phenomenal as an approach because it's solutions focused, it's value based, it's hey, what's our vision? How do we get there? And then also I have an LLC and I work as a professional counselor, and I usually operate from a solutions focused point of view. So it just aligns with my personality a lot. So I thought, oh, I want to see that and do a little bit of research in the consulting model and how that could be useful to companies. And then finally in the Module 8, where it's just talking about different things to do and not to do, one of the options or topics that came up was focus groups. And so I thought about not just focus groups, but companies utilizing focus groups to improve customer satisfaction. So looking at more than just what a focus group is, but how customer satisfaction is a big player in financial success of an organization. And some of the research that I didn't include here, but it's one of the articles I read for this. It also talks about how that shapes even the organizational climate, customer satisfaction. So we'll dive into that a little bit. So let's start with Module 5. So our text talked about the integration of several different factors that we as consultants need to use in our work. And so one of those is that 360-degree feedback model. Now, in a lot of the research that I read, it's also called a multi-source feedback model. And this is because you're going to take your individual self-evaluation, but maybe your supervisor and a coworker and a peer and maybe leadership that you don't really work with all the time, but they're looking at your outputs. It might even be that customer clientele, or like if you're a teacher, that student feedback, that would be part of your different sources, right? So in Sarita et al.'s 2021 quasi-experimental study, they were looking at how does multi-source feedback impact physician behavior, like at a large hospital, longitudinally. So a lot of the research is here in the moment, it's a snapshot, but this research was how does it impact it longitudinally? And actually what they found was these physicians became more results oriented. This was over the course of 3 years. So they piloted the study, and then the second year they're really like using it, and then the third year they're checking in periodically, and then they give the feedback. And what they found was it did increase their results orientation, but that was about it. That was really significant. And so some of the key concepts that kind of came up that I thought, hey, this is something important that I would be wanting to utilize as a consultant with a company, is understanding that it is essential that you consider which sources you use. So we may not get the right kind of feedback, and we may not feel great about the outcomes if the sources we're using are not really stakeholders. So it wouldn't be really useful for me to have somebody that I've never worked with and doesn't know anything about my work context. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it wouldn't really be helpful for them to give me feedback because they don't know my job, they don't know what I do, and so their feedback is not as useful as maybe a peer in the same role or my direct supervisor or my direct subordinate who kind of have a working idea of what I should be doing and how I should be doing it, right? So when we're talking with with our companies that we might be working with, organizations to consult with, we need to be saying, hey, this multi source feedback model is great, but not everybody is a source. Not everybody is an accurate source. So we need to really strategically think about who are we inviting to this conversation. Building on that, Batista's 2019 study looked at how do we actually analyze that data. So not just, how do we get, or what sources do we use, but actually how do we analyze it? And one of the key concepts that I wanted to build on and use when working with like an applied context is really considering the organizational context, not just the work output. So they actually looked at the dyad of not just, what are they doing and what's the feedback, but also where are they doing it, when are they doing it, because that makes a difference on their results. And one of the things that I liked is in this article, they kept using the illustration of the story, the metaphor where you've got 6 different men and they're looking at blind men, and they're looking at an elephant and they're trying to describe what is an elephant. And one is describing the tail and one the trunk and one the ear and one the leg. And it's like, well, were they wrong? Actually, no, they were correct. That is an elephant, but it was their limited perspective that and their location on the elephant that made the difference. So context matters when we're getting this feedback. So it needs to be also like understanding when I'm working with a company and I'm consulting, we're saying, are we using this information for development? Or are we using this for performance? That's also different. But if we're using this for development, we have a little bit more flexibility. But if we're really using this as performance, we need to be thinking about in what context are they performing? And this person's giving feedback, but a peer relationship versus a supervisor relationship is very different. So the performance also will be different. And then the bias that comes with that. Finally, in Burke's 2009 study, they looked at multi-source feedback specifically in a teaching model. So in higher ed, maybe I'm working with a university, consulting with the university. In higher ed, typically we get student feedback, and that's about it. We might get observed once a year where the dean comes and sits in our classroom and watches us for 5-10 minutes. Very different than K-12, which kind of have ongoing observations and yearly supervisor meetings and such. And so really the overarching purpose here would be that this multi-source feedback model would actually cause continuous improvement. If we are getting feedback not just from students who are in, again, one context, but also including like our teacher evaluations and community support and perspectives from supervisors and such, we actually get a well-rounded understanding of how we're doing, how we're performing, and how we could be better, which is the idea. So from a biblical point of view, what I have for each of my module discussions is just how do I integrate a biblical worldview, Bible type thinking. So when we talk about continuous improvement and we talk about getting those multiple sources of feedback, it just brought me to the idea of sanctification, that we are saved in a moment, but then we are processed through sanctification. It's the stretchiest word in the Christian experience. We have justified, we have sanctified, which happens right then, but then sanctification is this lifelong process of becoming more like Christ. How do I become more like Christ? Well, I get feedback, right? I have people speaking into my life, different contexts, different individuals giving me feedback on performance even. And really, even the church is meant to do that because we are supposed to encourage and exhort. And in Hebrews 13, it says, provoke one another to good works. So even be a little provocative sometimes and maybe stab at each other a little bit, like family do, right? So when we think about like the feedback model, this is also in our Christian walk saying, I need to accept feedback and be teachable no matter where the source is coming from, to try to integrate it so that I can be better, right? Okay, module 6. Here looking at trust building in multicultural context and consulting. So what we do know just based on the text is that there are so many issues facing companies that are transnational or global or in multicultural context. And so one of the things that's kind of the predecessor to successful work in consulting and these companies working together, and at the more granular level, individuals working with their employers or employees, understanding employers, is that trust building. And that is, no matter what culture you're in, there has to be a level of trust and respect there to actually get work done. So successful consulting, right? But also in these companies. So Lohman 2007 reviewed a couple of decades of research in multicultural context, and one of the themes that he identified was trust. It didn't matter if they were judges, it didn't matter if they were in these different kinds of companies or nonprofits. It was actually trust and effective relationship building is a key in multicultural context. And he just kind of addresses the idea that there's a bit of vulnerability when you're working with a company as a consultant, for sure, but the company is opening up maybe their issues, their situations, their less than stellar results, and they're saying, hey, help. And so this trust building is really valuable for getting in the world of the company and making a difference. But it also, trust impacts knowledge sharing and really organizational outcomes also. So when we're talking about different contexts, different multicultural contexts. Sanchez and King Toller 2007, they explored barriers to actual usage of counseling centers on university campuses. And so they actually hire consultants and they say, look, what could we do differently? And one of the things was there was not a lot of relationship building process going on. And so there was a lack of communication because there was no relationship. And this is between departments at the university. So you have the Office of Multicultural Affairs, and then you have the Counseling Center, that what they found was as they built trust between those departments, that actually the utilization of the Counseling Center by multicultural students increased. And whereas there's like a cultural difference between maybe American approach to counseling and other cultures, what they actually found was this trust building facilitated more usage of this counseling center. And so when we're working with clientele in a practical state, it would be, where am I trying to bridge gaps? And then if I'm trying to bridge a gap, have I actually built trust yet? Has there been that rapport building? As a counselor, that's huge. We have to have relationship, and a lot of, and I'm going to speak generally here, but I've read this somewhere that in a book, I'm sure, that the relationship between the counselor and the counselee is more important and effective than really the specific method that's used. So that relationship and trust is powerful. Cooper et al. 2008 actually looked at 4 different consultants' perspectives of multicultural issues and contexts, and identified 7 themes, but one of them was building trust and giving the relationship time to grow. And so one of the stats that they included was around the year 2000 that about 81% of Black professionals felt and thought that workplace discrimination was still common. And so when you think about it, like, what are the underlying tensions here that we're not giving voice to when I'm working with a company in an applied setting? What are the multicultural differences in the room that nobody's talking about but might be impacting outcomes? And that was something that I kind of picked up from this article too, was you have to talk about it. I mean, if the elephant's in the room, you got to talk about the elephant. Pretending like it doesn't exist or acting like it doesn't have an impact is not really helpful. So one of the things can be that in these multicultural contexts is that behavior can be misconstrued or misunderstood if we don't actually understand cultural underpinnings of what's happening. And so for a biblical integration of this, the Bible does really emphasize just truthfulness and transparency, right? So that open and honest communication, being upfront with what's going on and building trust as a part of building a consulting relationship, but also building a relationship between employer, employee, employee to employee, or even company to company. One of the articles here for my module 7 talks about like looking at these transnational companies and how trust was a big factor for them as well. So module 7, I looked at appreciative inquiry in consulting. And so McCoy 2014 looked at the literature on the use of AI, appreciative inquiry, in program evaluation and program effectiveness, increasing that. And what they found was AI is really helpful in change management because there's a bit of accountability that problem-centered approaches don't necessarily have, where if things are going well, there's not a problem to identify. So what do? But if things are going well and you come in and you talk about, through appreciative inquiry, strengths and values and wow, what's really working, you can actually increase and say, let's go next level. Which makes a big difference for an organization who's on the top of their game and they want to be there, but they don't want to become complacent or stagnant. Let's increase. So some of the key concepts was just they went over the 4D model. So you have you got dialogue, you've got design, you've got dream, and so through this, there's also space for discussion of negative factors as well. So that would be important when I'm working with the company to say, we're going to be very strength focused. We're going to look at our values, our missions, where are we at? But we're not going to avoid the negative either because it exists. Moore et al. In 2000 used AI actually in a large transnational pharmaceutical company to enhance a training program. So rather than, they had two options. So rather than looking at a gap in the training, and saying like, where's a skill set that we're missing and let's increase that. So very, very problem focused. They actually looked at who are those high performers that are doing well and what's happening that's really working for them. And then they tailored the training program to replicate those successes. And so they appreciated strengths. And what they found was they actually had better outcomes for this program that was strengths-based. And so this actually helped increase positive outcomes for their organization. And then finally, Miller et al. 2005, this was building an alliance between two different companies. So one that's US-based in biotechnology and one that was India-based biotechnology company. And so in their work, they actually had these alliance sessions where they used the AI model all four in each session, right? Now, that sounds great. In their study, they actually got through 2 sessions because one of the companies dropped out, but they did get feedback. And what they found was the AI session versus just a management exploration session. So they kind of had a control going on. What they found was the participants in the AI sessions were more engaged, they were more active and participatory, and they felt that way. That's what they perceived when they gave survey feedback. But then also, when they came back and they checked after I don't remember exactly how long it was, but over time, they actually found that the ones who went through the AI cycle were more likely to have worked on their goals and actually worked toward the ideas and plans that they had made, rather than those that had just went through the management exploration, which really looked at needs but didn't engage them in the process. So interestingly, they also made a suggestion which could be very applicable if I'm working with a company, is to spread out. So they use the AI cycle in each of those sessions, but based on their feedback, they also said, you know what, we could spread this out over the spread of maybe 3 days. And so the first day would be really diagnosing, and then the second day could be dialoguing and dreaming, and then the third day could be really designing. We've identified best future, what do we want, but then how do we get there, right? And it included another concept which I really liked, and I thought this would be helpful in an applied setting, which is keep it, stop it, and start it. So it's having a conversation about, we've got this AI cycle going on, but also what are the things that we're doing currently? Should we keep it? Do we stop it? Do we start it, right? So what are we missing? What do we need to keep going? What do we need to stop doing? What do we need to start doing? For the biblical integration, I just looked at like strengths as a gift from God. So when we talk about, well, what are my strengths in this appreciative inquiry? Well, I need to see that I can identify my organizational strengths as unique gifts and talents that God has provided, right? So I can look at my abilities and I can appreciate where I'm at and I can use them to better the team, the organization, but I also can do that spiritually as well. So finally, Module 8, using focus groups to improve customer satisfaction. So Conrad and Alvarez, 2016, looked at focus groups to expand their understanding of issues with a website that they use, so their campus library website. And through this research, and really this is what you're going to see in all three of these articles, just very different organization structures or context, but what you'll find is using feedback, actually using it, improves outcomes and user likelihood of of people using their stuff because they actually implement the feedback. So as I go through this process, they discovered what was really important also was having the right people in the room. So focus groups are great, but you have to have the right people in those focus groups. And what was highlighted in this work was just the disconnect between the organization and the consumer perspective. What do they actually need from that website for the library? What are they actually using it for? And then that helps you get more granular. And this would be what we might use for a company that we're working with is, what are we actually using this research, or what are we actually using our device for, or what are we using our product for? Is that the consumer is doing one thing, so let's get feedback because maybe our perspective is different. So Gilmore et al. 2020 found that utilizing feedback from focus groups actually increased the accuracy of product usage. So they looked at feedback information from a focus group on infant formula. And what they found was, doing a study afterwards, a follow-up from the feedback focus group, by changing the instructions, they found that the infant formula was used more accurately. So the balance of formula, powder to water, and the mixture and all those things were used better. I mean, this is essential. They used a quote or a statistic in their paper that nearly 80% of infants are going to use infant formula at some point in America. So understanding how to use it correctly and having clear instructions for using it is extremely valuable. So as a consultant, it's saying, hey, let's get a focus group together and feedback on how the process is and what kind of our goal is and what we've got going, and does it make sense to the client? And so the big takeaway from this is we have to actually use the feedback because the feedback is valuable. Not just a focus group for a focus group is great, but we have to actually really use the feedback. And then the final article, Takamoto et al. 2018, they looked at focus groups for wearable tech when they're trying to decrease sedentary behavior. So they want to say, will you use this Fitbit, or will you use this Java Watch or whatever, and why or why not, and how would it increase your activity and decrease your sitting time, sedentary time. And so by using the focus groups, they were actually able to get real life feedback about current wearable devices and some ideas of what might produce a better wearable device that could increase sales. So the focus group also, when we're talking about an applied setting, is increasing that customer voice, could also be creating future demand and potential for new sales. So we want to use those focus groups because they give us insight into what we've got going on, but we've also got insight into what the customer has going on and what they would like to see from us. And of course, so for that biblical perspective, it's just is just a respect for differences of opinions. So the Bible does give us the idea that we need to take in perspectives and grow and be teachable. And so giving everyone a voice is also a very biblical concept to say, hey, you're invited to the table. You can speak, we'll hear, we'll listen, and we need to listen with compassion. So that's another thing that we say when we listen to these focus groups. Something as maybe trivial or seems trivial as mixing infant powder correctly, but it makes a world of difference for infants and their moms when babies are constipated because they've had too much, or they're crying and they're hungry because they haven't had enough. Like, this has big implications for clientele, for our customers. So we need to listen with actually creating a culture of active listening in our focus groups. So, all right, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Not really, but thank you.